361 Firm and Alumni Connecting co-host the COVID-19 Update Global Conference, April 30, 2020. Please refer to important disclosures in the materials.
Stephen, with that, we are off. I'll hand it over to you.
I'm Sonia Elmquist. I'm a former journalist, and now I do corporate communications. We have Shawn Matthews, who's founder and CIO of Hondius Capital Management. Before that, he was CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, 30 years of active investing experience. Eric Lindberg, who's CIO and trustee of the AEK Foundation, experience in investing as well as on the operating side as a portfolio company CEO, now manages money in philanthropic capital and entrepreneurial businesses. Bryan Turley of Jones Trading, head of investment banking, debt, and structured products. Before that was at MLV and also Anglo-Irish Bank. Jonathan Dane, director of portfolio strategy and research for the Coury firm. Before that, on the sell side at Goldman Sachs, covering asset managers, trust banks, exchanges, M&A advisors. And Esther Dyson, who has very meaningful experience in healthcare and technology, and now runs a nonprofit focused on sustainable health and equity. Very wide variety of perspectives to discuss our key questions today. You know, what is your biggest fear from this environment?
And I think, caution is the word now. There's no reason to have fear of missing out. There's so much more information to come. And with more information, we'll all make better decisions. And trying to be the first guy to make that decision generally works out badly. And, let's talk briefly about distress. I think if somebody goes out today and tries to buy an office building in Manhattan, that's probably going to trade 3 more times before we get the true price discovery. So there's your point. Don't try and be the first guy to make and the smartest guy. Try and be the most educated in making your decisions.
One of the things that nobody is talking about right now is inflation. In fact, everybody continues to believe that the disinflationary environment that we've seen for the past, quarter century continues. And, one of our concerns is that, to your point, now everybody's trying to fix something that may not even be this massive crisis. And you've seen the Fed pump in an unprecedented amount of liquidity into the markets. And when you look at velocity, to this point, there's been pretty much an inelastic supply between what's been going on with government supply and monetary and the velocity of money. But we're concerned right now that because the money this time, not like '08 where it went to the banks and you could control it, we're actually concerned right now that this time it's at the end spenders, it's at the consumers, it's at the local governments, and it's at the businesses. And so without, whether it's massive increases in taxes, whether something with postmodern monetary theory comes in to actually control that supply, we think there's going to be a pickup in inflation. And when that happens, we're pretty concerned right now because bonds will break their negative correlation with stocks. And if that starts to happen, and if bonds no longer act as a hedge when stocks fall, we think there's going to be a lot of investment strategies to fail. There's going to be a lot of panic, especially even breaking it down to the end retail consumer level where they won't be prepared for this. And you could see, going back to this whole idea of liquidity in markets dry up as people panic because inflation expectations really haven't lived up to what they thought they would. So pause there.
If I could just add to that, if you have a second. I think
Sure.
The real challenge here, I agree with you. I think the real challenge here is the likelihood is we're going to see deflation before we see inflation. But with all this money in the market, you really have to think about when, because the likelihood is there's going to be a few years of very, very good times with all this liquidity in the market. But at some stage, we got to pay the piper. And making your investment decisions on whether that's 5 years from now, 4 years from now, 10 years from now, you do not want to be holding the baby when that event happens.
So I've been thinking about this, and as a tech person, I know this thing that's called tech debt, which is where you fail to invest in keeping your product in good shape and upgrading it and so forth, and then you end up with a total disaster and you need to rewrite everything. And in a sense, I would say this country has huge infrastructure debt, and it's not just bridges and airports that Elon Musk pointed out, or roads and trains. It's also the education of our population and their health. And so in a sense, we have a huge pre-existing condition. And we're seeing that poor people, Black people, people with disabilities, people with substance abuse are far more vulnerable to the coronavirus, and they're dying at much higher rates. But the real challenge is many of them are going to be permanently damaged afterwards. So in a sense, I see really two scenarios. I'm not sure which one it's going to be. One is we recognize this infrastructure debt and we finally started investing, as the Europeans do much more than we do, in social services and education and maternal health. And so the next time we have either COVID-19 coming back or some new pandemic, the population as a whole will be healthier. People will be more resistant. They'll have enough money. We'll replace some of them with robots so that there will be fewer of these frontline jobs. And we will invest long term in our economy and our infrastructure, and things will go really great. The alternative, yeah, here's my beautiful quadrant chart. Thank you. We're over on the bottom left. We're thinking about ourselves short term, and that has led to this infrastructure deficit I mentioned. Are we in fact going to start seeing longer term and understand more that the health of the country depends on the health of everybody in it? Or are we indeed going to be the people in rural Texas? I think this thing was a lie. I don't want to pay no taxes for poor people. And we end up with a more polarized country where it's really hard to get agreement on anything, where there's just more confusion, more cynicism, more resistance to authority, and it's very hard to build anything at all. And unfortunately, you can get rich short term in that kind of economy, but not long term. So those are the two scenarios. I really don't know which it's going to be. Obviously, I'm fighting for the upper right-hand corner, but we'll see.
Hi, yes. Basically, there's, as you may recall, what we are is more of a platform for development of personalized nutrition. Within that, our customers are healthcare, fitness, wellness, food, and nutrition companies. What we've seen is two things. First, we've been approached by many of the healthcare companies to implement Medicare Advantage or personalized health-related personalization for grocery delivery for those people who are most vulnerable. The second thing that we've seen change in the last few days is that there's a lot more initiatives around back to work. And that back to work initiatives are in relation to, yes, there'll be some people who will be immune and already have antibodies, and those can go back to work. But then there's other people who are still healthy that need to boost their immune system to go back to work and actually reduce the probability of getting seriously ill. So that has shifted attention away right now from how do we keep people who are more vulnerable to at home to how do we get people who are either immune or healthier back to work. And I think that one of the main things that this pandemic has done in the healthcare system is one of the insights we've had very recently is the whole system used to work on what they call B2B2P, which is a business to business to patient. So every single startup out there would have to go through the healthcare system to provide solutions into healthcare. And what we're seeing is a shift into direct to patient. That didn't used to exist. Either it was direct to consumer, which was a lot more based on wellness and meditation apps or nutrition, but something as a fringe kind of wellness that was not endorsed by healthcare professionals. Or it was delivered through the healthcare system, which was a diluted version of that. As regulations have come down, as they have been opening up specific ways in which doctors can now do telehealth over state borders, in the way that those telehealth interactions can now be paid for through insurance. And all of a sudden they've unlocked something that will allow startups to not only compete against healthcare systems, but actually there will be new breed of startups that will go direct to patients. And I think that will completely change the landscape. And the other thing that we're seeing is there's a very clear shift in relation to the way psychology and incentives over this first wave will create a larger second wave. So there is a risk. Two things. One is a shift in terms of how the lines that used to keep healthcare industry completely separate from the wellness industry are completely blurring, and that is allowing now and that will allow a lot of startups and a lot of innovation to happen in a direct-to-patient way.
What is knowable and doable? Last time you did such a great job of putting some of those things on our agenda. I'm expecting great things again.
Our team is specializing in looking at antivirals, and especially we're trying to go after combination therapies, working with the Mayo Clinic. Our technologies that we're developing are the combinatorial aspect is going to go after receptor binding, the ACE2 receptor, viral entry, to try and block the entry in the endosomes, and viral replication. When we think about viral replication, we've just had the remdesivir trial results show up. So the polymerase is a good target and looks promising. What I would say though in the space, if we really want to develop good antivirals, we need to be combinatorial therapies, polytherapies. Basically, multiple drugs are going to be needed to tackle this. We got the examples from HIV and cancer, where polytherapies are useful. And I think that's the approach. So remdesivir is going to be applied with something else. In this space, our group at the Mayo, we're going to be publishing some findings on the hypertension and how the angiotensin system is part of the problem here and is part of the solution. So drugs that are potentially going after hypertension, the right drugs can be combined with the right drugs to block viral entry and viral replication.
I believe that one of the main problems within this is that even the antibody testing that was done randomly in New York City said that probably there's 20% of the population already infected. If we use that number, and we know that the systems were overwhelmed in some parts of New York, we would have to assume that to get to 50% herd immunity, we need to prolong the same level of exposure for another 2, 3 months, 4 months. What I believe is that society in the US has not yet, will not be compliant with stay at home after this initial effort. I think that there's going to be a huge, those who have not had the problem will think that it was unnecessary. And those that start having the problem, it will be, they've already been staying at home for so long that there's still some people that will be leaving. So I think that a very focused approach on keeping the high risk population at home, and that is comorbidities with higher age comorbidities, and then testing everyone else that is going back either through antibodies to see the immunity and having some support will actually help get the economy reactivated. And I think it's really about doing it in a much more precise manner. And I believe employers are the only ones who have the budget to start testing for this and start managing so that they can reopen. And that's what we're seeing is employers are taking the lead on testing their employees. And I think that's the route to go, mainly because I don't think local governments will have the resources to do this en masse for everyone.
How have your families, I know most of us didn't have, although maybe you did, a pandemic response plan. We certainly had a hurricane plan after Sandy, but nothing for this. So how have the family offices responded? How have they responded with charitable giving, with changing their investment portfolio? What's been going on? Who'd like to go first? Eddy, you're up.
Oh, absolutely. A pleasure. So just to your question, when obviously there are typical companies have disaster plans, and roughly in day 4 or 5 of this pandemic, we threw all those plans out of the window because they were wildly inadequate, as nobody had foreseen the breadth and the depth of this pandemic, I think, in almost any company, right? So what we did is after a couple of weeks of sort of being starstruck and saying, what the hell are we doing? We sort of divided the portfolio of companies into 3 buckets. The first bucket being, we really need help on this one, sort of the damage control bucket. For some portfolio companies, the revenue really went to 0, and I mean 0. And as a result of that, significant cost reductions had to take place, and we had to furlough people, and all kinds of bad stuff need to happen, capex and cost controls. But what most important in that bucket was sort of the leadership. And rather than looking sort of for drivers driving by looking through the rear view mirror at cruise control on an empty highway, we needed to look for folks, and are looking for folks still, who can sort of redesign the car and also particularly the dashboard of that car. And so we're right now sort of in a search for who can best lead those companies forward that really have trouble right now, or educate the ones that are currently doing it but may not do it optimally because they've never been trained for this, right? The second bucket is the bucket where we see opportunity, and where we are either less hurt than other companies maybe, or where we see there's a change in competitive landscape coming, and we may be either more ballsy or have a different risk return profile and might sort of take opportunity by acquiring companies or by seeing sort of other opportunities that people don't. Investing in sales and marketing, for example, with a significant ROI before other people do. So we're monitoring those companies for continued add-on investments. And then the third bucket is new opportunities. And that's sort of, and a couple of speakers have been saying this before, we're carefully watching the market for new opportunities that come up through this pandemic, where other people shy away from it and are sort of too fearful to make any reasonable decision. I don't think we're fearful. We're sort of carefully waiting for the right opportunity to arise. The other part is obviously as a part of the family office, you always deal with a lot of philanthropic and charity commitments. Most of our commitments in our family offices have been and are multi-year commitments, and so we stick by them. We not necessarily do more or less, but those can't be changed, and we don't want to change those. But those are multi-year commitments. So I don't know, there's not a lot of changes in that respect.
You have a global footprint of relationships. How would you describe the zeitgeist of the global family office community right now? You're sort of a proxy for that in a way.
Well, I think that it's very different based on some of the things my panelists said on where you're located. I mean, I'm in New York, so it's a little different here. I think when the lockdowns first started, a lot of families were like, okay, it's 2 weeks, we'll do what we have to do by home, but we don't need to get excited about it. And then it got extended, and then it got extended. So where at the initial offset, a lot of the families weren't trying to pivot quickly, they are now. And a lot of families or foundations have gotten into trying to supply ventilators and PPE to the communities in which they live, helping in other ways. Their investment strategy has changed. Most people I know, well, a lot of them are going into the liquid markets because when the stock market started swinging so rapidly, they just were uncomfortable with that. A few of them are doing like what Catherine Hill-Ritchie's doing. The families are looking to be innovative in their investments in biotech, biohealth. So it's kind of all over the place, and I'm hoping that it'll coalesce a little more by June. If you call me back by then, I'll give you an update.